Can you see my screen? Building communicative skills, reading and speaking. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I can
Okay,
hear.
great. All right, excellent.
Yes, teacher.
Okay, so well, the first, well, as we said before, this year we are going to be working during all the sessions on reading and speaking. Some sessions will have more of an emphasis on reading, and others will have more emphasis on speaking. So when you are in the Google Classroom, you can check the calendar and you can see which sessions will be more about reading, which sessions will be more about speaking, and which sessions will have both. Okay, but to start, we this first session, it's going to be a little review of, yes, theory and common approaches to teaching both skills, and what is the relationship between the two of them. So today's session will be less practical. I'm sorry, but the future sessions will be much more practical than today's. But anyways, we're going to start with a short activity. Okay, in this first activity, I'm going to set you in groups with the breakout rooms. Okay, 4 groups, and you will be given one of these topics. Okay, one group randomly will have to work on understanding reading. Another group will work on teaching reading. Another group will work on understanding speaking, and another group will work on teaching speaking. Okay, so if you are assigned to understanding reading, what you have to write is, well, what do you understand by reading? What is reading for you? Um, what are the main characteristics of reading in English, or the main difficulties for students when they read in English? If you are assigned to the group with teaching reading, then the idea is you're going to reflect and work with your partners on what you normally do in a reading lesson, okay? How you teach it. Then again, there's no right or wrongs. You just describe what you usually do in a reading lesson. And the same with speaking. If you're assigned to this group, you will be discussing with your partners what is the purpose of the function, or well, no, what is the definition of speaking? What are the abilities that are involved in speaking, in oral production? And if you are assigned to the teaching speaking group, so you reflect or you share ideas on what you normally do for your students to practice speaking skills in class. Is everything clear so far? So I'll say,
Yes.
okay, so I'll set you in the 4 groups, and then to each group will receive a link to a Jamboard. You're familiar with Jamboard, right? And in that Jamboard, you write your answers. Well, not answers. You don't have to write anything to elaborate. Just discuss with your partners, and you can write like some main ideas or main examples according to the topic. Anyway, I'll visit each of the groups. All right, back to the main session. You had some minutes to discuss your views on speaking and reading. So let's start with understanding reading. So here, understanding reading. As you can see on the screen, there are a lot of ideas there, pictures, images. So would someone from the group would like to say something about the ideas you have there?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So as a group, we were talking about reading, and I'm going to read to you all the important things we, like as a group, chose. So reading is a process. It is an ability where people can obtain knowledge, learn vocab, and have analytical skills. Skills that are important in reading are the phonemic awareness, phonetics, fluency, vocab, and comprehension. We said that reading is one of the most important ways to understand words in a foreign language. Reading is a complex interaction between the text and the reader, and it improves our creativity, imagination, and it increases, as we said before, vocabulary and improves memory. And last but not least, reading is a conscious and unconscious thinking process where we apply strategies to reconstruct the meaning, not only in language, but even in culture. So that's what we thought about it.
Excellent, Erica. Excellent. Great ideas, great information for us, and great layout and design. Congratulations. Okay, so let's go back to the main presentation with information about reading, and then we'll listen to the other groups. There was a little confusion. Give me a second. Okay, are you seeing the presentation?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so if we go to the definition of reading. So this is a model of what reading is. So you can see that reading, as the group said, yes, is a process of creating meaning out of a text. But that creation of meaning happens because of the interaction between information in the text and knowledge, skills, abilities, expectations that readers bring to the reading process. Okay, so reading is just not decoding or transforming, letters into sound, but it goes much more. It's generating meaning. And reading usually happens in a situation. Okay, it's not the same if you are at home reading WhatsApp messages, right? Or if you are in the classroom reading a chapter from a book, or if you're at home reading a novel for enjoyment. So what does the text have? Well, the text, of course, has the author's intention. What is it that the author wants to communicate? What the author wants you to learn or to believe? Sometimes they want to influence your opinion. But of course, it has grammar, vocabulary, discourse, and content. And what does the reader have? Well, as a reader, you have intentions, you have a purpose for reading, you have knowledge of the language, you have previous knowledge about the topic, and you have a number of cognitive abilities. And the interaction of all that is what's going to create that image or that information of the text that we're reading. Of course, when we read in a second language, usually our limitation is that sometimes we lack knowledge of the language. Sometimes when we read in our first language, we have a full knowledge of our language, but sometimes we lack knowledge of the topic. Or we may have conflicting expectation of what the text is supposed to teach us. So what are the purposes for reading? Sometimes we read for very specific information. If you're reading a menu, well, you basically want to find the information of the food and decide what you want to eat. Or if you're reading job ads, you want to know which of those ads are looking, for example, for teachers, and what are the requirements. Sometimes we read just for quick understanding, how to operate a TV set. We read to learn, when we're reading in the university, in the masters, we read a textbook, we read an informative or non-fiction book, or even when we read the news. We read to integrate or create new information. For example, when students have an assignment that they are supposed to read different sources, compare opinion, contrast information. We read to evaluate. Right now that we are, there's an electoral campaign. So you want to really see if that information that you're receiving, how true it is. What is it that they are really proposing? Or we simply read for entertainment. So the purpose of reading is going to imply different skills and different ways of processing the information. So when we read for entertainment, it's very different than when we read to learn. When we are concentrated on trying to memorize information, when we're just trying to enjoy a fiction, for example. Now, reading involves lower level processes and higher order processes. Lower level processes, as Erica mentioned, involves, oh, well, and don't be fooled by the word lower level. The fact that they are considered lower doesn't mean that they are non-important. They are very important. But so in the lower level category, we have word recognition, orthographic processing, syntactic analysis of the sentences, phonemics. What is the association between letters and sounds? Okay, we have lexical access, the level of vocabulary that we have, how many words we know or don't know in the text, and proposition encoding. So the content of the text, how do we, uh, organize it into units of meaning? And higher order processing is less language centered and more cognitive. It involves predicting information, making inferences, drawing conclusions, understanding textual relationship, selecting appropriate reading strategies, distinguishing literal meanings from implied meanings, and recognizing the rhetorical structure of a text. Now, it's been found by researchers that weak language and processing skills hinder the ability to engage in higher level processing. So if we have lacks or deficiency in lower level process, we will be limited or we won't be able to implement higher level processing, okay? So reading is not about vocabulary and grammar, but if you lack vocabulary and grammar, performing the higher level operations or the higher level processing will be very difficult for you. And of course, that usually happens when we're reading in a foreign or a second language, okay? So, before we go on, and because we started a little bit late with the first introduction, I'm going a little bit fast. But before we go on, when we think of the way to teach reading, what do you usually do, or what strategies do you implement in your class?
I think like reading is not only reading words, but reading images. So I start with images. They are very visual.
Okay, great. That's a way to practice reading, not only with text, not only with words, but with images. Great. Any other suggestions or ideas or experiences?
I think it depends.
Well, I
Go ahead.
think that
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yes, Fidel.
okay.
And
I think
then,
that reading is very important in order in order to get, for example, culture, because when you read, it's not only to decode graphic signs, it's more important the knowledge, because as you know, I mean, people who read can, for example, get a lot of knowledge. So I think the reading is very important in order to get culture.
excellent. Remember, we said that we need lower level and higher level, but in order to make predictions, in order to draw conclusions, we also need previous knowledge of the world, of the topic.
Yeah.
So if you don't have that knowledge, even in Spanish, right? If you read about brain surgery, even if you are very fluent in Spanish, it's your first language, it's going to be difficult if you don't have that previous knowledge. So the same happens. And one way to engage and increase your previous knowledge is, by the way, by reading. Okay, so with reading, you learn a lot Yes, of how the world works, about the cultures, the different previous information that you will need. So one more participant, and we move on.
I consider that it is important also in order to read, to link the words in order to get a better fluency when we are reading.
Okay, yes. So don't read word by word, but make links between words.
Yes, yes,
Great.
of course.
Great. Okay, so one approach to teach reading is called active reading. Okay, and this active reading approach involves these elements. Activate prior knowledge, cultivate vocabulary, think about meaning, increase reading fluency, verify reading strategies, and evaluate progress. So as you can see, what you had in your Jamboard, what you have said, it fits with these ideas. But the thing is that you should try to integrate all of them. Sometimes you can use all of them in one single lesson, or you can implement them distributed in different lessons. Okay. So when you activate prior knowledge, what processes are involved? Both lower order or lower level and higher level processes, okay? And how can you get students to activate their prior knowledge? By reading circles, activities in which students just read for general information and for fun without too much analysis of the language, but just for the general gist. You can have students predict from titles and subtitles. You can have students do skimming and scanning. Remember, skimming is a very general and fast reading for general information, and scanning is focused, fast reading, concentrating on a specific information. For example, if you have a biography and tell students to locate all the important dates, that would be scanning. If you just tell them to read the first sentence of each paragraph and make a prediction, that would be skimming. How do you cultivate vocabulary? Well, by cultivating vocabulary, you develop lower order processes, especially word recognition and lexical access. So you can promote incidental vocabulary acquisition, help students learn more words. How? Precisely by reading. So reading is the goal and the means at the same time. But you can also teach students to keep vocabulary notebooks. And nowadays there are apps online for keeping this kind of vocabulary notebooks that, but students can do it in paper, or they can use Google Docs, basically to record every new word that they find, add the meaning, add a picture, etc. You can use vocabulary games in your class before going into detail with a text. And usually it's important to teach students to explicitly use dictionaries or even translators. But the idea is that they have to know how to use them, okay? Because many times they use them without really knowing how to. Think about meaning. With this part of the process, you will develop higher order processing, and this is the kind of activities in which students concentrate not so much on the language or the grammar, but they concentrate on the real meaning of a text. So you focus on the main ideas, you have them, you teach them how to write a summary, you teach them to create graphic organizers from the text. You can have them role play or enact the text. For example, if the text is an interview in the newspaper, they can perform the interview as if they were in a TV show rather than a text. Questioning the author or questioning the text, have students ask questions about what is it that the text wants to teach them. You can use jigsaw tasks in which different students have different pieces of information of the same text, and by cooperating and working together, they try to rebuild or reorder the original text. Increase reading fluency. This would promote lower order, but remember what I said, lower order doesn't mean unimportant or easy, okay? So how do students develop this? By reading for the general idea and not too many details. Repeated reading. Usually students, when they finish reading the text, okay, I finished, I'm done. But it is that the more, if you can get students to read the same text twice or more times, they will learn to do it more fluidly. They will learn for example, the first time they can read for the general idea. The second time, they can read it aloud to practice pronunciation as well. The third time, they can read it for more details and so on. So develop the habit of reading the same text many times, not just once, to get some answers to some questions. Time reading. You can set, for example, records, right, of time. For example, okay, today we're going to read 40 words in 1 minute. And then, okay, now we're going to read the same 40 words, but in a shorter time, and so on and on, okay? So you give them few words with a time limit for them to read them, and then you either increase the number of words and keep the time, or you keep the number of words and reduce the time. So they feel the pressures to try to do it faster each time. Read and listen. Of course, you can play an audio or a video while students read the information, and even closed caption videos. Those are a great way for them to listen to the information and at the same time decode the written word. Pre-fire reading strategies. So with this, you will help students develop both lower order and higher order, and teach them to set goals. What is the purpose of reading the text? What kind of information do I expect to get from the text? Okay. If you want students to be good readers, you have to be a good reader yourself. So you have to be a model, to show explicitly how you implement a specific reading strategy. You have to and conduct explicit reflection on a strategy used. So once students have practiced a reading strategy, well, have them discuss in groups whether they consider that the strategy was useful or not, what benefits do they feel the strategy gave them, or what they could do to improve. And then also teach students that if a strategy is not working, they can change it. So give them alternatives and don't force them to use the strategies that are ineffective for them. And finally, evaluate progress. And this would usually promote higher order processing of the text. So you can use summative reading quizzes. You can keep a reading journal or reading cards or record keeping charts. Record keeping charts, it's you have like the list of the students, and you as a teacher and they as students, they keep a record of what text they read, how many words that they read. If you're using time reading, what is the time limits or the time records that they have in each reading session, okay? But then again, as I said, it's good that you can use more than one of these in each lesson, but at the same time, you can distribute them in different lessons, okay? And you don't have to push all the 6 stages in each and every lesson. Okay, now let's move on to speaking. And there was a group who were discussing understanding speaking. So I'm going to share their Jamboard And I would like someone from the group to share with us, well, what you have written, what are your ideas. So who was in the room for this Jamboard? No one? Okay, so I'll read what you have there. So in this group, well, understanding speaking. So they say speaking is the fastest way to communicate and tell your thoughts and feelings. Okay. In the abilities, they consider the vocabulary, pronunciation, and fluent speech are part of speaking. In the importance, they said that it is important to know about other cultures, to increase your lexicon, your number of words you know, and to get a better job. Okay. And I guess these are also abilities of speaking. They say, well, speaking is communication, speaking involves fluency, and speaking involves pronunciation. Right? Okay, thank you very much to the group. Okay. Well, do you have other ideas here about culture, pronunciation, traveling? Great. Well, so now let's see what we have about speaking in formal terms. I'm going to share again the presentation. That's not the presentation. Okay. Now you're seeing it, right? Okay, so as you said, speaking. Speaking then involves dynamic interactions of mental, articulatory, and social processes. To express a message, speakers need to decide what to say and use their linguistic knowledge to construct utterances and encode this message in sounds and sound patterns that can be recognized and understood by their listener. They also need to consider the context of interaction and engage their listeners in socially appropriate ways through various linguistic choices and forms. So speaking, it's something like this. First, we have an idea, something that we want to say, something that we want to express, feeling, an emotion, some important information, a warning. Okay, this idea is in some part of our brain that some authors call the conceptualizer. Here you have knowledge of the world, knowledge of the topic, or the content of the topic of what you're going to say, and the cultural rules of communication. Then there's a second stage for formulation in which that idea is transformed into a phonetic and phonological shape. It's given words, it's given words that represent the meaning, and it's given a grammatical structure. Okay, so we transform ideas into language message. And then there's the articulator. The articulator refers specifically the parts of your lung, your mouth, your tongue, putting together these message and articulated it. Okay, so as you see, yes, as you said, it's very important for speaking. You need something to say. You need knowledge of what you want to say. You also need, of course, pronunciation, but also you need vocabulary. You need grammar too. Okay, and along this process, you have to use also communication strategies. When you're having a conversation and you notice you are not being understood, you have to rephrase, paraphrase, or change the way you're speaking. You have to find the best way to communicate your ideas. So speaking involves a number of skills, enabling skill, core speaking skills, and communicative strategies. Enable skill. So enable skills are the ones that focus more on language and that allow the conversation or the speech to take place. So they involve pronunciation, they involve speech functions, right? So knowing how to inform what kind of discourse to use in order to accept or decline, to make a request, to give an explanation, to give a description. Interaction management skills, okay? So how you initiate a conversation, how you maintain a conversation, how do you take a turn? And these interaction management skills are very associated to pragmatics, to pragmatic elements, and also to cultural elements, okay? So in some cultures, turn-taking rules are very specific, in others are more dynamic. And of course, you need discourse organization skills, knowledge of the structure of speech events. So if you're giving a presentation, there's a typical organization, a typical structure that you must follow. If you're telling an anecdote or a story, where there's usually a beginning, a development, and an end. If you're telling a joke, there has to be a punchline, right? Like the part of the joke that is fun. And we have to be familiar with those. The core speaking skills involved in planning your message, assessing if you are being understood, adjusting the rate, the register, and the content of your speech, choosing the appropriate communication strategies, and evaluating the effectiveness of your message. So notice that enabling skills include, of course, interaction skills, but also language elements. And the core speaking skills are more about the message and the content. And in communication strategies, well, you have social strategies, problem-solving strategies, and compensatory strategies. So all of these we use either in our first language or second language to make sure or to assure that communication is taking place. So social strategies, collaboration with the person we are talking to or that is talking to us, how we paraphrase our message, how we transfer the information for them, or how we make sure that we are being followed, right? By explicitly asking, or even by a facial expression, we can tell our interlocutor, we can tell if our interlocutor is understanding our message. Problem solving. So what do we do when there is a communicative problem, when we are not understood? How we cooperate or how we negotiate needs, or even sometimes how we avoid a topic or how we avoid a phrase or a word that is difficult for us. And compensatory, well, how we help keep the conversation going. So sometimes you forget a word or you have a language problem, so you can compensate using gestures, using body language, fillers. You know, when we say, well, I was thinking, these kind of expressions, fill in silences, okay, and give us extra time to evaluate our message, rephrase our message. So using these fillers is normal, and many authors recommend that we should actually teach the students to use them, or explicitly asking for help to our interlocutor. Okay. Now let's go to teaching speaking. So there were two groups talking about the way they teach speaking. So anyone in the first group that would like to, or well, share what they were discussing or talking about? So ideas are coming. What you typically do in class to get your students in English, sorry, to get your students to speak in English. What activities do
We'll
you do?
decide, sorry,
Uh-huh.
we'll decide to put our ideas onto the Jamboard directly. Actually, we didn't discuss a lot. So most of the ideas are in that Jamboard. For example, in my case, when I used to work, I like to work with the PPL approach, and I like to make my students well structured questions in order to promote and encourage the critical thinking. Although this is a long process because we had to do a project for one term. So sometimes it's a little bit difficult because I had many groups, many students, but with small projects, I think we can encourage and increase the speaking skills with the students.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mark. So, well, yes, the PPP approach, presentation, practice, production. So you give a model, then you give them the opportunities to practice the model conversation, and then to create their own conversations, but also working through projects. So with projects, students are going to be working, you know, for different stages, different parts, different moments, right? Here we have other ideas. Some teachers right here that they use images to introduce topics. I usually use dialogues in groups.
My students
I usually use songs, picture cards, and games. Sometimes I use images to topic, oh, sorry, role plays with topics related to my students' context and interest. When I work with the PBL, okay, the project-based learning, I like to make well-structured questions according to the topic. Great. And there was another group also working with teaching speaking. So would anyone like to suggest, well, read some of your ideas, or do you want me to read them?
Okay, well, I like to share something, but I have some problem with my internet connection. I'm gonna try to speak faster. So,
Okay.
okay, mine is color green. So for example, I have large groups and sometimes it's very difficult in order to foster speaking in students. But regarding the skills, knowledge of language, enable skills is it's necessary. Students, first of all, they need to have a high knowledge of language and discourse level. So when they can do it and they can use it. The most important thing for me is, for example, communication strategies. So because compensation, because they use Spanish in order to translate the words. So using compensation is a great strategy when they need to communicate their ideas and they don't know how to do it. One activity I use in my classes, first of all, because I teach from 6th to 8th grade. They are previous levels and sometimes they don't have a high level. Most of them, they don't have any level, more in speaking. So I try to use an activity sounding ring in order to promote confidence with themselves, self-confidence.
Sorry.
And okay, so bless you. And this is an activity they speak about themselves. It's likes, personal information, family, dreams, these kinds of topics, because I think for them it's easier speaking these kinds of topics than other topics. They don't feel confident, or they don't feel, or they are not very significant for them. This strategy I have used for a long time. For that reason, I think it's a great activity. I only check and monitor the activity and they speak. At the end, I correct the possible mistakes, no focus on the student, just in general, and the idea is to promote it. I don't know. It's
Excellent.
clear my
Excellent.
idea.
Yes, totally. Thank you very much. All right. Well, because we're a little bit short in time, let's go back to the presentation, but excellent contribution. Because the idea of doing it like this is that you're going to notice that many of the things that I'm going to present to you, you are already doing them, okay? Yes. Okay, so we're back to the presentation. Condition speaking. Well, there are many different alternatives. For example, Brown said like a continuum from more control activities to freer activities. And of course, he says that control activities are more imitative. Listen and repeat, substitution, replacement dialogues, right? Like they have a model dialogue and they basically do the same dialogue, but changing some pieces of information, or just read the dialogue. But if we go to the freer extreme, there is more extensive speaking, in which students do extended monologic discourse. I mean, like an oral presentation or a show and tell. They have judgment tasks. There is a problem, and students have to make a decision, or they can be like judges of the situation, decision-making tasks, roundtables, and debates. Now, what is the balance? The more basic the students, you try to use more imitative activities. The more advanced, more extensive. However, you should implement all of them with all levels. Okay, it's a matter more of proportion. So, with very basic students, you can use more imitative tasks and a few intensive and responsive tasks, and gradually increment or move on to extensive. And with more advanced students, of course, use more extensive speaking activities. Well, we are all familiar with the task cycle. It's a great way to promote speaking. So in the pre-task, students are given the necessary vocabulary. They are given a purpose for the task. They are presented a model of what they should do. Then they are given time to plan their product. Then they interact, they produce, they show their final product. And after they have used the language communicatively, it's when you focus on giving them feedback, okay? And it's when you focus on, you know, the pronunciation or the grammar or the vocabulary. But first, they work on using the language and they reflect about the language. Go propose this. You focus learners' attention on speaking. You make them aware explicitly of the characteristics of speaking. You explicitly teach them, for example, communication strategies, right? Then you provide input. Always give them a lot of input so they can speak. If students don't have what to say, information to talk about, of course, their speaking will be limited. Also, it's important to give them time to plan what they are going to say. Whether it's a dialogue or a presentation, you cannot just have them perform impromptu speaking. I mean, okay, stand up in front of the class and start telling us what you did last vacations. No, give them time. Of course, how much time? Well, the more basic the students, the more time they need. Then students conduct the speaking task, where there is a dialogue, where there is a simulation, where there is a presentation. After you have followed this cycle, they actually do it. But most of the times, students do this, and that's the end of it. But that's not. After they do this, is when we focus on the language skills and the strategies and the problems they have. We give them feedback, and we can even promote students giving feedback to each other. But after the feedback, give students the opportunity to repeat or to perform again the speaking task, okay? Then you reflect on learning, and then there's another feedback cycle. if you follow this cycle over and over, you're more likely to see results. Because when students just read the dialogue and you correct their pronunciation, they will surely say it right in that moment. But 2 or 3 classes later, they will make the mistake again. And remember, feedback is not only on language, you have to give feedback on the message or the information too. Well, enabling skills, activities to practice pronunciation. So tongue twister, Chinese whispers, read aloud. Those activities, they are not wrong. There's nothing wrong with them. They are very good. But remember, they are for pronunciation, not for speaking. They are an enabling skill, not the main skill. Activity to develop other enabled skills and communicative strategies. Games are great for that. Games like Taboo, Charades, a Pictionary. Ways in which students have a communicative problem, like in Taboo. They have to talk about movies, but there is a taboo word. For example, they cannot say actor. So they have to talk about movies without using the word actor. So they have to think of synonyms or gestures or other way to express the idea. Or they have to talk about the zoo without saying the word animals, right? To develop fluency, you can use jigsaw task or the 1, 2, 3 task. In jigsaw task, students work in groups with different subtopics. And then one student for each group moves to the other group to share the information that they discuss. Very simple examples. So one group, you want students to make a decision on how to invest the budget of the city. Okay, so one group is in charge of education, another group is in charge of health, another group is in charge of security. So first they make a decision in their group, and then one member of each group goes to the other group to try to convince them to support their proposal, right? So that's a jigsaw task because each member is going to have a different part of the information, but then they have to be moving and sharing to put all the information together and to reach a common outcome or a common decision. And in the 1, 2, 3 task, students create a story, and then they have to tell the story to 3 different people. Right? You know, like in speed dating, but the thing is that each time they have less time to tell the story. So the first time they have 5 minutes to tell the story, the second time they have 3 minutes, and the third time they have 1 minute. And this is a model of very common. Use pictures. Give students pictures for them to create stories, to describe, to create dialogues. This is called the picture cued speaking task. Or if students are too simple, just to ask and answer questions. Well, so in just 3 minutes, what do you think is the connection between reading and speaking? Because normally we usually see a connection between listening and speaking and writing and reading. But is there a connection or a way to connect reading and speaking? Anyone?
Yes, I think there is a connection, is a link because, for example, when you read about the situation, let's make an example. For example, the war situation in Ukraine, and you read about the topic, about the situation in that country between Russia and Ukraine, and someone asks about your opinion. So you need to inform, to read, and after that, you are going to speak and tell your opinion to another person, depending on the questions, obviously. So that's why I think the reading and speaking are linked.
Excellent, excellent, Martin. Yes, remember, if we are a very basic level and it's natural to use very controlled activities, that's okay. But as students progress and we want to give them freer activities, activities in which they produce more meaning, they have to have uh, information, and they have to have those meanings to produce. They have to remember, they have to have these knowledge of the world, knowledge of the topic. And one of the best ways, not the only one, of course, but one of the best way to develop that knowledge, feed their conceptualizer, is by reading. So speaking activities based on personal experiences, they are great, they are very useful, but speaking activities in which students actually have, as Martin said, some background information based on reading the news, based on reading a novel or a short story, will lead to richer oral production. Okay, now, if we go now, just to finish, well, remember there is the attendance list and the evaluation going on. The last thing I'm going to show you is just what you should do in your e-portfolio, okay? So if you go to the Google Classroom, let me just find it myself. Yes. So if you go to the Google Classroom, can you see it already? Okay, so here's is the first lab, building communicative skills, reading and speaking. So you click there. As I told you, you already have the presentation I was showing. And I hope by Friday, I will have already uploaded the video for this session. Okay, and here's is the first task for your portfolio. But because we are very short, the idea was to do it during the session, but well, it will have to be like a little, let's say, assignment. So the idea is that today we summarize or adapt our conceptual framework to our context and reality. So think about these questions and then add the answers to your own portfolio. So has this presentation changed the way you view reading and the way you view speaking? So remember, when you worked on the Jamboard and then we watched the presentation, there was a lot of consistency between what you already know and what the let's say conceptual or theoretical framework says. How consistent is this information with your usual practices and with the characteristics of your context? So because of what you share, I can see that you are already doing many of the activities or approaches that I showed you today. So the idea is that how do we implement them in a more systematic way? Finally, how can we connect reading and speaking? So we're not going to have time today. I'm really sorry, but when you can, enter in your my portfolio, add a slide, and just answer this question. That's all you would have to do. Okay, you don't have to do for this one nothing too complicated or too extensive. Well, everyone, thank you very much. Sorry we passed the time, but at the beginning, well, we had to explain very carefully the portfolio and the Google Classroom. Thank you for your attendance. And well, I don't know if you have any final comments or questions.